Good evening and welcome to the Southern Center for Human Rights 28th Annual Frederick Douglass Awards Dinner. We are honored to have you here with us as we recognize Christopher K. Walters of Reed Smith, LLP. We also recognize and appreciate you, all of you, for your critical support of the ongoing efforts of the Southern Center. I am deeply honored and humbled to have been named the latest chair of the Southern Center's Board of Directors. During the nearly 20 years that I've had the privilege of working with Southern Center, I have been continually amazed at the tremendous ability and extraordinary work ethic of the attorneys and staff at the Center. They defend those who would not otherwise have counsel. They develop and litigate civil cases targeted to provide the greatest impact to the most disadvantaged, and they engage with lawmakers and the community at large to shape a more just future. And throughout all these efforts, they treat their clients, each other, and even the most difficult opposing counsel, which we have one right now in a case I'm co-counseling, with dignity and respect. As we witness widening inequality and increasing injustice, the Center continues to exemplify the ideal of true selfless commitment to a better world. So with that, I'd like to recognize some of the, you're all special, but we have some special guests in this room that I'm going to recognize. We are fortunate to have the following former judges join us here this evening. The Honorable Frederick Weisberg, the Honorable Gerald Fisher, the Honorable Paul Friedman, the Honorable Carolyn Lerner, the Honorable Robert Morin, and the Honorable and current board member, Beverly Martin. We have several former honorees with us this evening, including Debo Adigbali, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, sorry. David DeBruin, Rich Dieter, Ruth Friedman, Anthony Graves, and Cliff Sloan. And I'd like to thank Avis Buchanan for joining us this evening. Thank you all. I'd like to thank all my colleagues on the Southern Center Board for their time and dedication. I know tonight we have 3 former board members, and I'm going to recognize them. Maureen Del Duca, who was the former chair. Jim Garland, who just came off the board, he was a committee chair. And Betsy Biben is here. So Betsy, I'm glad you're here again. That's awesome. And I want to thank the entire Southern Center leadership team and staff. We have a number of them. And so if everyone from the Southern Center could just stand up very briefly so we can recognize you. Finally, I want to thank the team that put this event together and the sponsors who made it possible. This program shares the work being done, celebrates successes, and calls us to support and advance our work. Now, I would like to introduce our MC for this evening, and he will guide us through the remainder of tonight's program, Kevin Keenan. Kevin has nearly 30 years' experience in facilitating social change. He has held pivotal roles at esteemed organizations including the ACLU, the Vera Institute of Justice, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where he played a crucial role in fundraising and transformative justice initiatives. He is known for exceptional ability to align organizational strategy and for providing practical, trusted support to executives. Kevin, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Alan. Alan, I've seen you in action. You are an exceptional leader and board chair. The Southern Center is lucky to have you and amongst its many great champions. Thank you, Alan. Well, this is starting well. I just dropped my note cards all over the stage. I have talked to many of you before and told you that I need your support here tonight. It's my first time emceeing anything, so thank you, table 2. Thank you. And look at you guys out here. What is it, a Thursday night? A week before, was it Wednesday night? Oh, I must be at the wrong event. Wednesday night, sure enough, a week before, you know what, right? And you're out here supporting this great organization, this great work. That's remarkable. Someone reminded me that tomorrow is Halloween. I totally forgot about that. I'm so anxious, and I imagine you are too, but give yourselves a round of applause for being out here tonight. And just keep clapping all night long to channel that nervous energy so we don't drop dead from anxiety. No, really, whatever happens next week, the Southern Center will still be here. And I want to tell you why I support them. It's 3 things: their relentlessness, their deep integrity, and their being exceptional partners. And that means partners to community, partners to the legal community, and partners to all its supporters. Many of you are here tonight in that capacity. So I know from the applause we just heard that Southern Center is familiar to many of you, but for others here tonight, it's your first exposure. You came here because your law firm had a table, or your law firm's client told you to come here tonight, and that's great. I'm not going to go on and over-explicate about those 3 adjectives, but I am going to check back in with you later. And you tell me if those 3 adjectives don't just come pouring through in tonight's program. Relentlessness, integrity, and partnership. It's going to be an extraordinary evening. We're going to get started, and speaking of integrity and relentlessness, I want to introduce to you an attorney who's been with Southern Center for 17 years. He fights every day for people facing the death penalty and extreme sentences. Please welcome to the stage, Patrick Mulvaney.
Good evening, everyone. It is a tremendous privilege to get to introduce Chris Walters, our honoree tonight. Chris is senior pro bono counsel at the law firm of Reed Smith. And as we honor Chris, we also celebrate his wonderful colleagues at Reed Smith, some of whom are here. We're honoring Chris tonight for his extraordinary commitment. His extraordinary commitment to standing up for the dignity and humanity of people who are facing the death penalty in the United States. As some of you know, Chris worked as a commercial litigator for many years, but he was as committed to pro bono work as any attorney could be. So when Reed Smith decided to create a position of pro bono counsel in the early 2000s, Chris was the obvious choice. At the time, Chris was already involved in a capital post-conviction case in Pennsylvania. He and his colleagues were representing a client who had been sentenced to death years earlier. Well, through determination and brilliance and creativity, Chris and his colleagues won that case. Yeah. The client was resentenced to life instead of death. Our friend Liz Varkesian, who worked with Chris on the mitigation in the case. Liz is here. Liz remembers what happened right after the final hearing. This is a quote from Liz. "We went over to the client's parents' house afterward, and they treated Chris like a member of the family. That they loved him so much is a true testament to how invested he was in the case." That Pennsylvania case was only the beginning for Chris and death penalty work. A few years after he had become pro bono counsel, there was a crisis in Alabama. The crisis arose because there was a sharp increase in new death sentences in Alabama in 2006 and 2007. In those 2 years alone, there were 25 new death sentences in the state of Alabama, which is a striking number for a single state. And so what happened a few years after that, as those cases moved through the direct appeal process, was that people were coming out of the direct appeal process and going into what's called state post-conviction, and they needed lawyers. And the state of Alabama wasn't providing lawyers for people for state post-conviction proceedings. So because of this sharp spike, around 2008 and 2009, there was an extreme need for attorneys to volunteer, to take cases pro bono in post-conviction proceedings in Alabama. Now, Chris already knew what an enormous commitment it is to take on a death penalty case. He knew that. He knew how much time it would take. He knew how much time on the road, how much time in Alabama on the ground. He also knew there were people who desperately needed representation. And he knew that there was something profoundly wrong with the state sending people to death row and not giving them counsel. So Chris answered the call. He not only took on a capital post-conviction case in Alabama himself, he also recruited more than a dozen attorneys from Reed Smith. In that moment of crisis, Reed Smith took on 4 capital post-conviction cases at once in Alabama. And they didn't stop there. In the years since, more emergencies have come up, and Chris has answered the call again and again and again. Mark Bookman from Philadelphia says this: "What I like most about Chris is that he is a yes man in the best way possible. When you ask him if he might be able to take a case, his first instinct is always to say yes." Reed Smith now represents 8 clients in capital cases in the Deep South, from Alabama across to Texas. I can't talk about active capital cases, but I will say that the work that Chris and his colleagues have done in this field has been incredible and extremely impactful. Through all that work, Chris has always been looking out for his clients and their dignity. I remember getting a call from Chris years ago, and I thought he was calling about a litigation issue in one of his capital cases, but no. Chris was calling because he was concerned that his client had a medical issue that wasn't being addressed at the prison. So he was doing everything he could to get the client the care that he needed. It would be impossible to measure the impact that Chris has had through his capital work. Through the capital work he's done himself, and through the ways in which he has recruited, inspired, and mentored other attorneys. Many attorneys who have been doing this work for years say that they never would have gotten involved in it if not for Chris. The last thing I want to say is that Chris is also a wonderful colleague and a wonderful human being. He's incredibly kind. He has a smile for everyone who crosses his path. And he has tremendous compassion particularly for those most in need. I think Rob Dunham, who's here tonight, said it best. Chris is an excellent lawyer, but he's an even more excellent person. We're honored to present the Frederick Douglass Human Rights Award to Chris Walters.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for those ultimately kind words. It is sure a momentous day when you receive an award as prestigious as the Frederick Douglass Award. And I'm very, very grateful. Thank you. It's important to me personally, and I think it's important for another reason as well. Because it tends to shine a light on a law firm that's willing to take difficult cases, capital cases, even where the clients are guilty, and fight for their lives against unfair death sentences. You know, in Alabama, in our cases, the unfairness is clear to everyone in so many cases. It was clear to the juries who convicted our clients in Alabama. We had several of our cases where the convicting juries voted against the death penalty when the state asked for it. In two of our cases, the jurors voted 12-0 against the death penalty. And yet the Alabama judges were allowed to override these juries and impose death on these defendants, our clients. These were white judges imposing death on our clients who were mostly black. These are outrageous sentences, and they're only an example of many others around the country where death sentences are excessive and out of control, driven by career prosecutors looking for a higher notch on the political standard in their states. I would love to see other law firms. We're also willing to take cases where there's a claim of actual innocence and a potential for exoneration someday. But that's not most of the cases. In most of the cases, the clients are guilty, but they should not be at all candidates for execution. There are people I would like to thank tonight. I didn't know, Patrick, just whom you would name, but first of all, I want to thank my wife, Terry Silent. I love her. She is my top cheerleader and has been ever since 25 years ago I began doing this work. My colleagues at the firm, needless to say, thank you, Patrick, but over the last 15 years since we began the Alabama cases, probably 50 have stepped up to do this work, and I have an enormous debt to all of these people, some of whom are here tonight, even from firms outside Reed Smith now, and still working on these cases. Certainly we could never, even collectively at our firm, do these cases without the help of the Southern Center, who are the experts, the world's experts on these cases. There are so many to thank for that work. I just would like to thank a couple who have helped us directly. Sarah Forte, who has gone into the field with our people in Alabama to speak to jurors and develop evidence. To the Inspirer-in-Chief, Steve Bright, who if you want inspiration, listen to Steve. He went to our New York office and spoke to our lawyers there about the urgency and importance of their work. That was years ago, and they are still inspired. And to Patrick himself, Patrick, for the very beginning, was our trainer. He trained our teams. Because after all, these lawyers that I'm dealing with, my colleagues, are not criminal lawyers. They probably know nothing about criminal law at the beginning except when they went to law school and they spent one semester on criminal law. They need to be trained. And they're up against tough adversaries in the highest stakes type litigation. Patrick has trained these people magnificently. I can't say enough. And in the 10 years, I would say at least since that time, given advice to our teams all along the way, especially at critical times when we get a bad order and we're about to commit suicide. We call Patrick and he says, oh no, relax, we get these orders all the time. You know, you have 14 days, what you do is you file an XYZ motion, and here's a sample of what we just filed like that 2 weeks ago. I mean, it's fantastic help knowing this. So just let me also, though, mention a couple of my mentors in this work. Mark Bookman has already been mentioned tonight. Wow. Mark is virtually the Atlantic Center for Capital Representation in Philadelphia. Rob Dunham, who is here tonight. I can't thank you, Rob, enough. He was so often, in the earliest days, he was so often in my office teaching me how to be a capital litigator. And Liz Varkesian from Baltimore. Liz, thank you so much. Liz founded the organization called Advancing Real Change, ARC or ARC, and they are, at this point, the world's experts on finding and developing mitigation evidence that takes a case that looks hopeless and turns it around. Thank you, one and all. Of course, it is fitting tonight to speak of Frederick Douglass. Okay. When fighting against slavery in his time, he used words that they apply equally to fighting capital litigation in our time. These words were, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did. And it never will. That sure is true. Because in our capital cases, we have arrayed against us the power. The powers that be, the prosecutors with a conviction already in hand, the state attorney generals, the state itself. The only way we can fight these things is, as Douglass said, with a demand. Now, in a courtroom, a demand, we call it a claim, okay? We make a lot of claims. We were taught that by the Southern Center. You know, even in the most hopeless looking cases where the client is guilty of sin and has a death penalty, we have found by these claims, relentlessly asserted, we can succeed and save a life. Consider, for instance, one case we had in Pennsylvania. We took it on post-conviction, after the conviction. The appeals had been exhausted. It was in a rural county of central Pennsylvania, Ruby Red County. The judge was known as a hanging judge. There had been a brutal murder of an elderly man by our 21-year-old client. No question about it, he was guilty. The jury convicted him, sentenced him to death. Shortly after the verdict, the judge addressed the press about that case, which had shocked the entire community. He said, if ever there was a crime deserving of the death penalty, this was it. So imagine how we felt when we realized that all of our post-conviction papers, claims, had to be submitted to the same judge. Truly, it seemed hopeless, but we're taught to do this by the Southern Center. Lots of claims, please. And we filed 18 claims initially. The judge got rid of the first 17 after looking them all over rather easily, but he felt he needed a little more evidence on the 18th claim before he dismissed it. So he gave us an evidentiary hearing. Wow, what a hearing that was. What a hearing. 4 days full of emotional testimony. 11 witnesses came in with documents from 10 years before to substantiate what they said, testifying to the horrid life history of this client when he was young, when he was a teenager and so forth, before the murder. Sexual abuse by a trusted uncle from the church. I won't name the church, it's not the Catholic Church, it's another church. Physical abuse, getting, beaten out of him. And these things had led to mental illness of this client before this murder occurred, and there were records documenting the mental illness before this occurred, but the jury had never heard this. The judge had never heard it. It was highly emotional. Even the sheriff's deputies in the courtroom for security had tears in their eyes. The judge was shaken. He kept a straight face, but I could tell he was shaken. He ultimately issued a 75-page opinion, the longest he had ever done in his life, getting rid of the death penalty for this client. Power does not give up easily. There were years of appeals. But ultimately, the power gave way to the demands. And even with this judge, he found, I think, a new respect for lawyers who do what we do. Ultimately, it was a life sentence, and the client is doing as well as possible these days. And thank you, Liz, for visiting him so frequently. I want to close with a shout out for the Southern Center, in case you weren't already suspecting it. I know this award has my name on it, and that's great. But, maybe it ought to be the other way around, because I feel it's we who should be giving awards to the Southern Center, and not the other way around. So let me ask each of you tonight, what else can you do, if anything, to support the work of the Southern Center in these difficult cases? And particularly, I'm focusing on the cases where the client is not innocent. We read about that in the paper all the time. But where the clients are guilty and yet facing a death sentence that probably doesn't fit the case or the client. If you're a lawyer at a law firm that has the capacity, could you lobby your firm to take on a case like this of actual guilt instead of actual innocence, and see to it you might save a life? Every victory in these cases saves a life. That's something we can do. Others will have other ideas. But bottom line, I thank you for this award.
Congratulations, Chris. You deserve to be very proud tonight, and your family and friends also deserve to be very proud of you tonight. Are there any other lawyers here tonight? Please raise your hand. I know it feels a little dangerous, doesn't it? But it's okay. We don't get enough credit. You do not get enough credit. I mean, really, we're dedicated to truth and due process and fairness. The rule of law, these things are what's barely holding this country together, right? So let's all join hands in prayer for the rule of law for next week. No, we won't do that, but they're going to start to serve dinner, and I do want you to start seriously thinking about what you're going to give to the Southern Center tonight. This is a fundraiser, and I've sat in your seat, I've been at these tables, and do you give? What do you give? Is your partner there? Is your client there who would notice? It's, you know, those of you who are new to Southern Center, that's a little tough question tonight. But just know that any amount you give, certainly one billable hour's worth, does so much justice work in the Deep South. Goes so far when you give it to the Southern Center. As you heard, you are literally saving lives. And if you don't believe me now, just wait for the rest of the program. After dinner, you will be convinced of that. Before we do that, though, I want to acknowledge the wonderful folks who have sponsored tonight, the law firms, corporations, and the families. Our luminary sponsors, Morrison Forrester, Reed Smith, the Sussman family, and our champions as well, King and Spalding, Lawrence and Jennifer Zimmerman, and Munger Tolson Olson. Thank you. Every one of those places, someone made that happen. That's not nothing. And so think about what you can do tonight. What's the next right thing we can do that supports integrity, relentlessness, and partnership no matter what happens next week? So until then, oh wait, I had this other thought. What are you doing tomorrow between 2 to 3 p.m.? Are you at work, presumably? Like, show of hands, everybody going to be in the office more or less tomorrow? Do you know what appointment you have at 2 to 3? You can look at your phones, you can look at it later. But what if we all tonight pledged the dollar equivalent of a billable hour? And tomorrow at 2 to 3 p.m., we were doing whatever work we were doing, right? We're editing a brief for like TikTok probably, right? Or Clorox. Great clients, love them, hope they're sponsors next year. But at the same time, we know that all of us spiritually are in partnership with the Southern Center from 2 to 3 p.m., right? We're multitasking for justice. Think about that when you think about what amount to give tonight.
We want to take a few minutes tonight to remember Tony Amadeo, who passed away on May 7th of this year at a hospital in Texas. Tony was a former client and longtime friend of the Southern Center for Human Rights. When Tony was 9 years old, his family was driving through the night from Georgia to Texas. It was Tony, his parents, and his sisters. They were going to Texas to celebrate Christmas with family. And then a truck struck them head on. Tony's parents and one of his sisters were killed instantly. From that point on, Tony's and his other sister were shuffled around through foster homes and other places for the remainder of their childhood. And at an early age, Tony began struggling with substance abuse. When Tony turned 18, he decided he wanted to join the Marines. So he joined the Marines, but he was still struggling as an 18-year-old in the Marines, and one day he left his Marine Corps base with 2 other young men. They ultimately carried out a series of robberies, and Tony shot and killed a man named James Turk. This was 1977 in Putnam County, Georgia. The trial was held a couple months later. It took 2 days, and Tony was convicted and sentenced to death at the age of 18. A few years later, the Southern Center began working on Tony's case. It was Steve Bright, Palmer Singleton, Ruth Friedman, who's here, Mary Sinclair, and others at the Southern Center. The state of Georgia was doing everything it could to try to kill Tony Amadeo. They were moving him through the appellate and post-conviction process. Then a new issue arose. It turned out that the district attorney in Putnam County had instructed the jury commissioners to intentionally underrepresent black citizens and women on the master jury list. Steve and the team litigated this issue, and it went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In June of 1988, the court ruled unanimously in favor of Tony, and Tony's conviction and death sentence were set aside. When the case was sent back, the Southern Center continued to represent Tony, and Tony was sentenced to life instead of death. Now, to say that Tony made the most of his situation in the years that followed would be a massive understatement. There was a college program in the Georgia Department of Corrections at the time, and Tony started taking classes. Then he took more classes and more classes. Tony eventually graduated summa cum laude from Mercer University while in the Georgia Department of Corrections. This is Tony, along with Steve Bright and Bill Warner, at his graduation. Tony also served on work crews. He was a very good carpenter. He was the best worker that the prison had. And he used his other time while in prison to provide hospice care for other incarcerated people who were sick and dying. Steve Bright has said that he has never seen anyone do so much with their time in prison. In 2015, the Southern Center had the privilege of representing Tony again. And this time, it was in a parole hearing. And Tony, in 2015, was granted parole. By that point, he had served 38 years in prison. On the day he was released, Tony came directly to the Southern Center. This is Tony with Palmer Singleton. And this is Tony here with a group of us at the office that day. Tony then moved to Texas, and he worked as the operations manager of a ranch there. He was responsible for hundreds of cattle. He got to spend a lot of time with his cousins who lived in Texas. He never had another interaction with the legal system. In fact, Tony would pay his parole fee for the whole year on January 1st, just so that no one could ever suggest that he missed a payment. Tony also stayed in touch with the Southern Center family, and some of you may remember that in 2015, Tony was here and came and spoke at this event. A few years ago, Tony was asked in an interview, "Do you think you repaid your debt to society?" And Tony said, "No. It will never be paid. Every day, I think about that." He went on to say, "You can't undo mistakes. You can't undo the tragedies of your life. All you can do is take one step at a time, one day at a time, trying to be the best person that you can be." And Tony did that. Tony was a kind, thoughtful, caring, loving person. We have a video from about 6 or 7 years ago that includes Tony speaking about his life, and we're going to play a very brief clip from that video.
If I could go back 40 years and speak to the 18-year-old I was then, I would caution me to think and act in a way that wasn't harmful to myself or to others. Being able to visit with family and friends and experience the issues in their life and be a part of their life is a blessing. I enjoy going outside early in the morning, watching the sunrise, listening to the birds, and it's just phenomenal for me and so enjoyable.
We were incredibly fortunate to get to work with Tony and to get to know him. Tony was a testament to the power of redemption and a reminder to never lose hope. We will miss Tony Amadeo, and we will keep our memory of him alive as we press forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for that special tribute. It is now my honor to welcome to the stage a true warrior for justice. She has dedicated her career to transforming the criminal legal system and ensuring justice for all. Under her guidance, the Southern Center has achieved remarkable victories. She is a fighter, she is unstoppable, and she is one of the nicest people you will ever meet or work with. Please welcome the Southern Center's remarkable Executive Director, Terica Redfield Gansey.
Good evening. I'm short, so I have to do that. We are so grateful to all of you for choosing to be with us tonight as we honor and pay tribute to Chris Walters for being so impactful, so effective, and so influential in protecting people on death rows across this country. Congratulations again, Chris. We are in awe of you. Alan recognized the board already, but I want to give a personal thank you to our current and former board members for giving their best to the Southern Center for Human Rights. You give so much more than your time, talent, and treasure. Thank you for giving us your hearts. And to my colleagues, thank you for showing up day after day with inspiring commitment and sincere compassion and a fire for justice that cannot and will not be extinguished. You do the hard work, and this work is hard, y'all. The death and the misery that we often see and try to stop can be soul-shaking. At times we break down and cry, because that's what happens when you care so much. Injustice hurts everyone, and those of us who are working for change are not immune to it. This work can break our hearts, even as we are pouring out our souls into it. And yet, and this is why I love my team, and yet we continue. We press on because of the hope we see in the eyes of the people we are trying to help. We press on because while injustice is heavy, it is no match for our commitment. And our vision for a just world is unwavering. We are tearing down systems that some say are too entrenched to change. I was at an event early part of this year, and a well-meaning person said to me, "Terica, if Southern Center would be less controversial, if you would do less controversial work, you would get more support." And like I said, it was well-meaning. It really was, but it ignored something very special and critical. Southern Center exists. We exist to fight unapologetically for justice. And that means we take the hardest cases, exposing policies and practices that perpetuate oppression, and demanding not just reform, but transformation. We were born in 1976 with this commitment, and today we carry that legacy forward And we know that changing hearts and changing minds isn't about playing it safe. It's about standing firm in what's right, consistently, with integrity, and in deep partnership with our communities. So I had to remind my friend of who we are. I reminded him that we speak truth to power. When a judge who, as he sentenced our client to death, said, "Have mercy on your soul." Former SCHR Executive Director Stephen B. Bright loudly, and if y'all know Steve, you know he's loud, he said, "Have mercy on your soul." Yes. I reminded my friend that we are experts at fighting for equality, dignity, and justice. When capital cases are at their most dangerous stages, Southern Center is the one who gets the call. I reminded him that we are visionaries. When we start many of our campaigns, whether for a statewide public defender system or protester defense, these campaigns are often looked at as radical. Yet, we win these fights. We win these fights because we don't limit our work to what's probable to achieve. Rather, we push forward with a vision for what's just, and we bring others along. Being in the business of changing hearts and minds, we know that injustice festers when people's stories end at their race and their poverty. This event is named after the great Frederick Douglass, and it's named after Mr. Douglass for a reason, because he is one of our heroes. And he famously said, as Chris alluded to today, "Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without the thunder and lightning. They want ocean without the awful roar of its many waters." This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, but it must be a struggle. Power, Chris, concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. We at the Southern Center demand the impossible, and this room is full of the energy that keeps this demand alive. As you heard, our friend Tony Amadeo, he was a man who this society deemed unworthy of living. But we saw something that they refused to see. We saw Tony's humanity. We believed that a young man who had committed horrific acts still retained his human right to dignity. We understood that a state that had failed Tony at every stage could not hold the moral high ground when they declared that he should die. We knew that the state didn't deserve to kill Tony. And so we fought. Alongside him. And as Patrick mentioned, Tony, he cared for others. He took care of others, and he lived a remarkable life. And we have had the honor of being a part of his life all these years. His story demonstrates why we don't give up on people, why we believe when others do not, and why we match that belief with fierce advocacy and abundant love. Our work focuses not just on ending darkness, but also in ushering in the light. And so I want to introduce you to, I want you to meet someone whose resilience underscores the power of love and light. Miss Sandra Turner spent years incarcerated in one of the worst prisons in Georgia, giving birth to her daughter and suffering indignities that would shock the conscience. But she did not give up. SCHR's incomparable Deputy Director, Atteeyah Hollie, who joined Patrick Mulvaney in starting our resentencing project in 2015, supported Ms. Turner in her journey to reunite with her daughter, Gracie, who is also here with us tonight. You might have heard Gracie bossing us around over there at that table. Sandra and Atteeyah, thank you for being willing to share your story. Please welcome them to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. We are just going to have a little bit of a conversation, and I'm not going to be so much the focus. The rightful focus would be with Ms. Turner. It's so good to see you up here.
It's good to see you too.
Yeah. It's wild having a conversation in front of people, right?
It is.
Yeah. But it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Turner, Terica mentioned a little bit about how you were incarcerated and such, but you had a whole life before that happened. And so can you talk a little bit about your life before and your successes and your career before you went to prison?
Yeah, I thought it was important to kind of mention my life prior to incarceration. I did go to college for 5 years. I got a bachelor's degree. I was an educator for Fulton County 8th grade science. I was in a marriage that where I had a cheating husband, and I guess I just didn't know how to deal with that. Like, I didn't know how to handle that type of trauma. It seemed like grief, you know. So I basically just, over those years of separating, like spiraled downward and began a self-medicating type thing that led to me being incarcerated. So just wanted to put that out there, I guess.
Yeah. None of our stories begin with the moments that we get involved. We have entire experiences and lives before that, so I'm glad that you shared that. So Terica also mentioned that you became a parent in prison, and so can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Yes, I was 4 weeks pregnant when I got arrested. I had no idea. It was with my first child and only child. I found out in booking, where they check in, I found out I was pregnant. And I tell you, I probably had always kind of been waiting to be a mother, but I just thought it wasn't going to happen. And truly, that was probably the purpose I was waiting on, the motivation I was waiting on, because I had lost a lot of my purpose and motivation in life. And I was just waiting on that moment, but it just so happened that it happened right during COVID. And I had a long sentence ahead of me at the time.
Because what year were you arrested?
I was arrested in 2020.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And when I think about new moms and first-time parents, I think there's a lot of gentle treatment, and we have a special regard and recognition for new moms and what they've just been through and this whole new life that they have. How were you treated as a new mom on the inside?
I really feel like, you know, we know our body, we know how we're feeling. Like, I know I have a vitamin D deficiency and things like that. What I went through is I kind of felt like I know they actually did not believe that I had these issues, you know, like, I felt like I wasn't heard. I felt like they weren't, you know, they believed the prenatal was enough vitamin for me. That was all I needed, you know, but really, truly, I needed more. Being a parent also, or a pregnant mother inside, the nutrition factor is so big. Like, you have no idea how important it is to feed that baby well, and they are not feeding you well, I promise. They feed you a little extra, but it is not well. I didn't get exercise, I didn't get sunlight, so my vitamin D3 was super low, and who knows what that does to a embryo. You know, and then the depression I was going through and the crying all the time and being there during COVID, I was like alone. There was like 4 girls there the whole 5 months, and I was very much alone and sad. And I remember like crying all the time and thinking, gosh, this can't be good for for my baby inside me, you know. So that part was it's pretty difficult.
And how much time were you able to spend with your daughter before you were returned to prison?
So overall, it was like a 2 hour, 1 hour. So within like a day, between like Tuesday afternoon and Thursday early morning. So basically Wednesday, I probably spent 6 hours with her. When it came to the last 2 hours that I was allowed to spend with her, I wasn't able to. I was so sick at that moment. I had an emergency C-section, and I was so sick at that moment. I was having these weak, hot flash sweats going on, and I said, I can't hold her. I was like, I got to go back to the room, and the nurse was covering me up with 3 blankets, and I didn't feel well at all. And it was at that moment that actually an officer had showed up to take me to prison, and I was like, I really shouldn't go right now. I don't feel well. He says, well, we got to take you, and here's these ankle shackles. We got to put these on you, and we'll wheelchair you out to the van.
So they put ankle shackles on you and put you in a wheelchair.
They did.
Took you to a van.
They did. You know, and later that officer actually apologized to me and said something similar to, well, you weren't lying, were you? You actually were sick. But, you know, they don't believe you when you tell them you don't feel well. Now, if you were a free person, I promise you, if you tell them, hey, I shouldn't be leaving the hospital right now, they probably wouldn't make you leave. But they don't believe you when you don't have, I guess, the freedom, of that. They don't believe you. But I remember it was a very painful ride to the prison. I was holding onto that seatbelt connection at the ceiling, trying to lift myself as I'm riding because the bumps were just killing me. I actually sat 6 days in the infirmary in a cell that had these glass windows. And I remember just banging on the window and telling them, hey, I'm not well, I'm sick, there's something wrong. And the nurse actually came up to me and she was like, oh, you're just being a baby. I had a C-section before, you're just being a baby. But meanwhile, I had severe sepsis going on. I was very close to death. And when you count the ratio of the white blood cell count that was going on in my body at that time. I did end up getting rushed to the hospital after they did a urinary test 6 days later and realized, oh my God, she might not make it to the nearest hospital. And I ended up getting, I did have my C-section scar, but I ended up getting 19 staples down the front of my stomach. And spending 2 weeks in the hospital, that was pretty rough. And then I was actually still sick after that, and they didn't believe me again. So they sent me back to the prison where I started kind of flipping a little bit, and they sent me back. And it was at this time where there was this more of non-belief, but also kind of a not following maybe what they should be doing.
Do you mean the law?
Yes.
Okay.
The law. Mm-hmm. They should have been following the law. I remember I was like, House Bill 345, House Bill 345, you're not supposed to be shackling me right now. I have a C-section scar, 19 staples down the front of my stomach. I'm ready to go to the hospital. Because this was after I came back to the prison. I spent 2 weeks at the hospital. I came back, I was still sick. And I remember telling the sergeant, I said, hey, I'm still very sick. And it turns out I had 750 milliliters of fluid on my left lung. It was crushing it into the size of a fist. That was the true pain. That's where all this pain was coming from. But they somehow just didn't notice it for almost 3 weeks. But yeah, they said, well, if you want to go to the hospital, you're going to put these shackles on. So I said, well, I guess we're going to put them on then, So I put them on, wrists and ankles, and around the waist, while having 19 staples and a C-section scar. And they put a milk crate out, in front of the van and said, okay, get into the van. So I had to crawl up in the van on my knees and elbows, and I get into the van. And all along, I find this was very risky in a way for my health and well-being.
It's a very mild way of putting it.
And I do understand the whole reason for this law extending into the recovery of the mother who gave birth. So, you know, that was a piece of my experience there.
Yeah. But in standing up for yourself and saying that this House bill expressly prohibited them from treating you the way they were treating you, and also treating other mothers the way that they were treating them, you not only brought change to the prison, but you really affected the lives of a lot of new moms who would follow you, unfortunately, into that space.
Yeah, so it was kind of common for a lot of the mothers to be getting shackled and taken to the prison. It was also very common for the mothers to be placed in what we call diagnostic housing, which is actually very dangerous. That place is very dangerous. Okay, that's where all the people go first before they decide where they're going to put them. So, you know, you have your murderers and a lot of gang members and things like that, and they will definitely not give you your bed, you know, or whatever else you might have. And some of the mothers were going there with their C-section scars and being forced to sleep on top bunk and not bottom bunk like they were assigned, because you don't get to choose once you actually get there. Yeah. Well, the benefits of the Southern Center at this time, right? And I hope I'm not like jumping ahead in this part, but the benefits of the Southern Center is they made that phone call for me, and they posted in the Associated Press and the Washington Post what was going on with me, and all of a sudden the whole prison just changed. And I was there and I saw it, like they changed. They actually quit putting mothers in diagnostics. All of a sudden they were going to this place called Faith and Character, and it was a very safe place to go. Everybody respected everybody there. That was a big deal. And they did quit shackling. I started asking mothers, hey, were you shackled, you know? And they said no, you know. So just the fact that the Southern Center called and checked on me, decided they needed to let the public know that the prison wasn't following rules and guidelines with me. It really made a difference to all the other mothers who came after me. And I thought that was the most important part. You know, I know that I had to go through it, but what was most important to me is that other people didn't have to go through it.
Can you tell us about your daughter?
Yes. So my daughter is actually sitting over there. Her name is Gracie. She was actually diagnosed while I was in prison with having a brain tumor. And she has been on chemo. She's doing great. She's doing really good. But she's been through some things. She really has. She went through about 4 different households that she had to live with. And there was nothing that I could do. She spent a good 1.5 years in one household that was not treating her well, in terms of not giving her medicine. Her brain tumor was growing uncontrollably. She was on a feeding tube and had a feeding tube bag, so she wasn't eating. And defects that took her from one family, put her with one family, took her from another family, put her with another family. But, you know, eventually she was with a pretty good family, and they were very knowledgeable. And next thing you know, she started eating again, and we got the feeding tube thing gone. In terms of she don't need that no more. She's always hungry. She always wants to eat. Her brain tumor, so she's been living with me now since June. And by the way, DFAC said that I was the best mother they've ever had on their caseload. Mm-hmm. And that they hope that, they wish that I could teach other mothers how to do what I did. but her brain tumors decreased over 70%.
I agree with almost everything that you said. The one thing I don't agree with is the fact that there was nothing that you were doing or could do. You were on the inside not only fighting your own case and trying to gain your freedom, but you were also appearing in DFACS hearings to try to protect her and save her. And so you were fighting so many battles at once. And so I never want you to minimize what you were doing because thank you. Because your impact is so real and it's so profound, and we see it here at this table. So I just wanted to say that I disagree. All right?
Thank you.
We don't have much time left. I think we only have time for one more question. So I just wanted to ask you about, now that Gracie is with you and you have all the custody of her, just some of the firsts that you guys have had since she's been home with you.
Yeah, so I'm being the best mom that I can possibly be, and I swear I gotta be the best mom ever, but we are doing all of our first now, right? So it was her first birthday on Sunday. It was my first time getting to be with her on her birthday. It was our first plane ride here. You know, it's gonna be our first Halloween tomorrow. It's just, we're just loving life, and we're here to love and be loved, and I just hope that she just loves the world and what it has to provide for her, and I want her to experience everything the world has to offer.
Ms. Turner, it has been such a privilege getting to know you and working with you and being with you on this journey. You have been such an inspiration to me, and I think I tell you that almost every time that we speak. You have almost an unmatched strength and a capacity for love and a capacity for fighting, and I'm just so proud of you. I'm so happy for you and Gracie. I look forward to continuing to be in touch and supporting each other in the next chapters ahead. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Turner, we are so honored to have been a part of your journey and to continue to watch and see you and Gracie grow together and have many more wonderful, wonderful memories. If you wouldn't mind indulging me, I hope this doesn't bother Gracie, but I would like for us to just sing one little stanza of Happy Birthday to Gracie. Is it okay? All right. I don't sing very well, so 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gracie. Happy birthday to you. Ms. Turner's story and Gracie's stories is a reminder that sometimes our best is yet to come. Her journey joins nearly 100 individuals that we've helped begin again. Time and again, our team makes magic happen. Our resentencing work in Louisiana, for example, has been so successful that people incarcerated started declaring, when you get a visit from Mike, he's one of our senior attorneys, when you get a visit from Mike, you better pack your bags because you're going home. That's the reputation that this team cultivates, and it makes me so proud because it demonstrates the power, the infinite power of hope. After resentencing, we support our clients in successfully navigating their transitions home, because we know that freedom is just the first victory. Just last week, we hosted a reentry retreat with our clients who are rebuilding their lives. The retreat creates a network of support and provides skill building, therapeutic coaching, and lots of fun. And I want to show you a few photos from last week's retreat. This first photo is of one of our clients explaining his vision board. We asked our clients, we asked them to dream. We asked them to put their goals and aspirations, put it down so that they could remember it and use it as inspiration as they work to reach their goals. The next photo is of a computer training. They asked for this training. They asked for this training last year because they understand the challenges of doing all, rebuilding their lives in this technology-focused world. Some of them, as you can see, were more seasoned when they came out of prison. And so we are very proud that we were able to help them build that skill at this retreat. This is a photo of Mr. Dan. He is an entrepreneur now. During this retreat, we helped him build out his logo, and you can see here he brought some of his jewelry that he is selling as a part of his new business. As you have heard, our resentencing advocacy and reentry work is vital and it is effective. And tonight, we're going to ask, and we are asking you to help us raise $25,000. And that feels like a lot. And I had to breathe to even just say that because Southern Center, if you know the Southern Center, sometimes it's hard for us to ask for money. But we're trying tonight because we had a grant that was supporting our reentry work and it is no longer available. The grant provided funds for emergency housing, medical expenses, counseling, welcome home packets, financial stipends, and more. And it also supported that reentry retreat that I just showed you photos of. Some of our former clients, including Ms. Turner, could not attend that retreat because they could not afford to take off work. So with your help, we can provide stipends so that no one in the future has to choose between an income and the chance to learn the skills that will help them set up themselves up for their futures. We lost that grant, but we are committed to finding a way or making a way to keep this program thriving. And we are asking for your help. We are asking you to help make a way for the next 100 people who we will get released from prison. Together, we can do something truly transformative. Your donations tonight will go directly to helping people like Ms. Turner and so many others who, with care and support, can and will thrive. Your generosity is what turns hope into action, belief into impact. We are deeply, deeply and truly grateful for your support tonight, for every dollar you gave and every cheer you raised. Thank you for helping us make the impossible possible.
Thank you, Terica. And thank you, Sandra and Atteeyah. Sandra, especially for sharing your story. That's just utterly remarkable. As you saw, I got to sit with Gracie the whole night long. It was like I'm dropping my cards again. Some bookends, yeah. Look, at your tables in your programs, there's a QR code where you can donate. It actually shows how many donations and how much money we've raised so far. I just checked, we're about $8,400 towards a goal of $25,000. Think about that 2 to 3 p.m. meeting we have tomorrow where we're all going to be multitasking for justice, and tonight we're going to give a billable hour's worth towards that goal. It goes so far with the Southern Center working for justice in the Deep South. And I want to tell you something I had the pleasure to learn from speaking with folks there. Whenever I talk to a colleague at the Southern Center, they're either just back from visiting a prison in rural Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, or they're on their way. And just think about how grueling that is. That's not what most organizations, legal organizations, and lawyers do, especially if you can get them on the phone. And I learned this really special fact that I found very touching and powerful. They don't like to give bad news to their clients over the phone, right? And there's lots of bad news in these cases, as you've heard. So when they have bad news, they drive out to that prison, break that bad news in person, so that they can be there to support and empathize and comfort this client on their journey, and at the same time, talk about next steps. Because there's always next steps with the Southern Center. That's the relentless part that I was telling you about, right? So they make that incredible journey just to share that news and to fight and fight and fight. So please join me in supporting them tonight. We're gonna keep that donation link open. I want us to get to $25,000 before dessert. If we don't, or even if we do, I want in the next 48 hours, when you remember something from tonight, one of the stories you heard a heck of a lot of stories. Chris's stories, Sandra's and Gracie's stories, so many stories, and they represent only a fraction of the amazing work that the Southern Center is doing. So when that pops into your brain in the next 48 hours, I want you to go to that link and donate. And donate again. Round up. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So that almost concludes our evening. I want to thank again our incredible sponsors. I want to thank the amazing board of directors and staff. I want to thank all of you for coming out night before Halloween, 1 week before you know what. Whatever happens next week, the Southern Center will be fighting with the deepest integrity, partnership, and just utter nonstop relentlessness, because that's what it takes. Thank you, all of you, for being here.